Hi everyone, I am Dr. Sana Shahid, and the title of my presentation is I Feel Good When My Teachers Knows My Name. Well, this study is about exploring emotional and personal strategies to foster connection in online learning. This study was meant to include both findings from non-participant observation and interviews with the faculty. But since I'm still waiting for IRB approval, I haven't been able to do the interviews yet. So for now, I'll be sharing what I have seen through observation, how instructors are quietly and creatively trying to bring energy and connection back into online teaching. Let's start with something familiar. Right now, maybe you're watching this presentation in a quiet hall and someone near you might be checking their phones. Maybe you just glance at WhatsApp yourself, and I'm here on this screen wondering, is anyone actually listening? And that exact feeling, it shows up all the time in online classrooms. A student logs in, camera is off, mic is muted, and the teacher is speaking. The teacher is flipping the slides. But on the student side, not much is happening. Now think about the teacher. They are talking to the screen with no faces, no reactions, just silence. And on some days, even we as researchers, we find ourselves asking, is anyone really out there who's listening? That is what I want to unpack today. The silence, the disconnection, the emotional gap between students and teachers in online spaces. Yes, online learning is full of potential, but right now it often feels isolating. Students feel invisible. Teachers feel like they are performing in the dark. And you know what? Most people don't talk about how heavy that feels. So today I want to focus on something different. Not the technology, not the tools, not even the content, but the human strategies that help bridge that gap. And you know what? Sometimes something as simple as a teacher using your name, it can completely change how you feel about learning. Well, a lot of research points to the same thing that online learners often feel isolated, they feel less engaged, they feel disconnected, and that gets even harder without real time feedback or casual interaction with the teachers. Even though these issues became more visible after COVID, studying online teaching, it has never been easy. Um, and if we talk about the instructors and the method of non-participant observation, it was never easy to use non-participant observation or participant observation in online teaching practices because many teachers, they're not just comfortable being observed in their virtual classrooms. And if we talk about the literature shows that online education in US has deep roots. If we start with the Plato, um, in 1960s, there were things like forums and online tests. And in 1985, the first online accredited graduated program was launched. In Utah, Governor Levitt pushed for computer-based learning in 1994. And USU then jumped in early with the Internet Navigator course in 1985. And then by 1998, over 25,000 students in Utah were learning online. Among them, 8,000 were from USU. Today, that university, USU, is nationally recognized and ranked 32 for online bachelor's program. And that's the main reason behind choosing this university for my research. Well, why non-participant observation? When I was designing this study, I took inspiration from digital ethnography, especially Cosinet's idea of nethnography. His work really emphasized the importance of quietly observing online communities without interfering in order to understand how people actually behave in digital spaces. Studies also suggest that when researchers become actively involved, like joining classes discussions or teachers forum, it can influence how people act. They might hold back, they might change their tone or behave differently just because they know that they are being observed. And that's exactly why I choose non-participant observation. I didn't interact with anyone. I just observed the online courses quietly, like sitting in the back of the virtual classroom. And this method felt not only more reliable, but also more respectful. You know what? Online classes can be very sensitive spaces. The students are logging in from their bedrooms or shared homes, and teachers are juggling between tech issues and emotional labor. And sometimes it's not just about academics, it can be personal as well. So, non participant observation helped me capture the real picture, the everyday teaching strategies without disrupting the class atmosphere or making anyone feel uncomfortable. If I talk about the objective, I still remember once a professor said to me that online teaching is like teaching into a black hole. And that feeling is not rare. At Utah State University, many instructors say online teaching takes even more time than in person. Planning videos, writing feedback, updating content, it takes a lot of time. But students often don't realize it. Past research in Utah has looked at tools like podcasts, hybrid courses, and tech access. And a lot of earlier work focused on tools, systems, how to deliver content, how to train teachers. But we haven't talked about the human side. What does it actually look like when a teacher tries to connect with the students online, especially when their cameras are off and nobody's talking? And that's where my study comes in. My goal is to highlight those subtle, often invisible practices that actually help students feel seen and supported, even in a virtual space. So I did a non-participant observation of real Canvas courses to find out how do instructors create emotional engagement in online classrooms. Preparing field access and piercing techniques. Well, well, before I could begin observing online teaching, I had to navigate a range of institutional and logistic challenges. Because I arrived mid-semester in United States, I wasn't assigned as a teaching assistant. And due to lack of some official documents, I couldn't access Canvas. It took me almost 1 month in order to access the Canvas. And furthermore, entering a new institutional and cultural context came with its own learning curve. You know what? The teaching style, the platform, the way instructors relate to students. I mean, coming from Pakistan to the United States mean entering a whole new teaching culture, the technology, the students' expectations, even how students and instructors are communicating with each other. It was all so different. So, in beginning, to understand the local teaching culture, I attended webinars hosted by CIDI and I had preliminary conversation with difficulty. While my supervisor helped me connect with the professors, I remained cautious about the potential for bias in those relationships. I also had to think multiple times about what role should I take. Should I act like a student, a teaching assistant, or something else entirely? In the end, I chose to be a non-participant observer. And that role made the most sense for my study because I wanted to see how teachers naturally design and deliver online courses without trying to impress anyone. So, despite initial concerns like language barrier and cultural distance, I soon realized that honesty and humility build trust faster than trying to position myself as an expert. There were some ethical concerns as well. Like scholars like if I exactly remember the name is for like Jarvie, Lee, and Planke. They have debated the ethical limits of non-participant observation. Like if I'm not engaging with the participants, how much presence is too much? And where is the line when it comes to informed consent? Some researchers, like I think his name was Golden, he got permission from the teachers but not from the students in non-participant observation, and that raises some privacy concerns. In my case, I was observing exemplary Canvas courses, and these were shared by faculty to guide other instructors at Utah State University, and I had no access to student comments or data. I had only access to the teacher created content. So there were not much ethical concerns. Furthermore, I also had to stay reflexive. I was constantly asking myself, how is my background shaping what I notice or what I miss? To be very honest, by the second week, I felt less like an outsider and more like someone who could contribute to meaningful conversations in online teaching. Well, to tell you about my fieldwork journey, in all 10 Canvas courses, I observed one pattern that emerged. It was both powerful and often overlooked. Instructors who conveyed human presence through emotional and personal engagement created learning environment that felt alive. Well, research often focuses on technology, design, or content, but what I saw was that the connection exactly matters. It appears that when instructors nurture relationships, even from behind the screen, students feel less like isolated users and more like valued participants. This shared humanity embedded in digital spaces shape the very tone of these courses. And what's striking is how these simple, often invisible choices, things right in front of us, can quietly transform the student experience. So, what are those simple things that make the difference? Let's take a closer look. Well, there were five important strategies which I noticed during my non participant observation research. The number one is active participation. Let's look into that. As I observed these Canvas courses, something stood out. It wasn't the technology, the fancy tools, or even the content. What made the difference was how instructors showed up as genuine, real people. In course after course, I noticed a pattern. When teachers were actively present, students responded differently. Active participation from instructors, emotional, personal, and consistent, it created learning spaces that felt alive. I saw that instructor use a student's name regularly in feedbacks, in announcements, in replies. A small act, but it made students feel seen. You know what? They scheduled one-on-one virtual meetings, not just for grading, but to check in, to listen. And the most powerful thing, a simple smile during recorded session. It made the digital space more warmer, more human. Another thing which I noticed is personalized feedback, often through videos or audios. It helps students hear encouragement in the teacher's voice, not just read it. And they also used games and creative prompts, making participation feel joyful, not forced. These small acts of kindness, these small intentional moment of active participation, and it quietly changed all the learning experience. Another thing which I notice is how approachable some instructors made themselves, not just during the class, but well beyond it. They didn't just list their email and phone numbers. They reminded students again and again that they are available. I am here for you through WhatsApp, email, Zoom, or even in person if needed. And that's what matters the most. Students knew that they could reach out for help anytime, whether it was a quick question late at night or the need for one-on-one Zoom session during a tough week. I have noticed that some instructors even checked in when deadlines were approaching, just to say, hey, how's it all going? And what stood out most wasn't the tools, it was the tone, that calm, patient, consistent presence that made a student feel seen, supported, and not alone in the process. Another thing which I notice is non academic help. Like in the Canvas courses, I observed some instructors stood out, not because of what they taught, but how they connected. They didn't just teach, they noticed. They picked up on small things in student assignments, discussion posts, or even the tune in the messages, and then they responded with care. You know what? I saw teachers say things like, "Hey, I know some of you are going through a tough phase. Please feel free to reach out." Or, "If you're looking for a job, here's something you might find useful." They also did little things that made a big difference. They started classes with casual check ins like, "How's your week going?" They shared non academic content, maybe a motivational quote or a fun post. I have noticed that they gave personal advice about stress or mental health and stayed open when students talk about their family issues. And they often offered professional tips that had nothing to do with the syllabus. It reminded me that great teaching isn't just about academic, it's human, it's observant, and it's deeply supportive. Another important strategy which I noticed is constructivism. You know what? Constructivism is more than a theory, it's a strategy where students and teachers co create knowledge. And in the exemplary online courses, I observed one thing was consistent: learning was not delivered to students, it was built with them. Instructors used inclusive language like "we should do this" instead of "you must do this." And you know what? It created a sense of shared responsibility. The teachers invited students to comment on each other's assignment, turning isolated tasks into conversation. They designed discussions where knowledge was built collectively, not just consumed. I even saw teachers co create class norms with the students, making expectation a shared agreement rather than a top down rule. And when it comes to exploring content, students were encouraged to offer multiple interpretation of text, images, or data, which shows that different perspectives were not just accepted, they are being valued. And these strategies were not random. I feel that they were intentional. The teachers brought constructivism to life in ways that made students feel seen, heard, and truly involved. Another thing which I noticed is strategic sharing. One powerful strategy. These instructors didn't just teach content, they shared part of themselves that made students feel seen and safe. They start seeing the instructor as a human being who can also fall down, who can also cry, who can also laugh. They openly talk about making mistakes. The teachers start normalizing that learning is not always perfect, and that's okay. Some shared small personal stories or past academic struggles, which help students realize that they are not alone in facing setbacks. Their teacher can also fall down. I also noticed teachers bringing in pieces of their own professional journey, what worked, what didn't work, in order to inspire students and offer them real world perspectives. And often they would use life examples, not just textbook ones, to make lessons feel more relevant and real. And this kind of openness wasn't rare, it wasn't random, it was intentional, and it built trust. It made the learning space feel more human, more connected, and honestly, more effective. Well, to conclude, through my observation of online courses, one thing became very clear. The most impactful instructors were not just good at delivering content, they were present as humans. They showed what I would call human presence through emotional and personal engagement. These instructors didn't just stick to lectures, they adopted a constructivist approach, encouraged in students to participate actively and stayed approachable, even beyond office hours. They also went beyond academics, offering support for mental health, life challenges, or job concerns, and they strategically shared their own stories and struggles in order to build a kind of trust and connection. What I found is that when instructors combine these five elements: constructivism, active participation, approachability, non academic support, and personal sharing, it creates a learning environment where students feel more engaged, more supported, and ultimately more successful. Well, thank you so much for listening. I'd be happy to take any questions. My email address is written right below the slide. And if you have any questions, you can email me the questions and I would love to answer them. Once again, thank you so much. Sana Shahid signing off.